You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome back to Dungeon Master of None. I'm Rob.
I'm Matt.
And we have a very special guest, returning guest tonight with us, Cristina from, well, among other things, I Seduce the Dragon, but also a game design and character expert. Welcome back, Cristina.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a delight to be back.
The crazy thing, we had you on the podcast, but like, how many people do you run into the wild, like, that you've read one of their Reddit posts before? That's either really awesome or really crazy, but yeah, that's you.
Thank you. It is a rare feat to run into someone and be like, wait a second, I know you from Reddit.
That is extremely rare. There's a vanishingly, well, not all the great Reddit posts have already been made. We're living in the the shadows of a greater civilization, and so it's not so common anymore that that somebody goes viral or becomes popular for what they said on Reddit. But you are the author of one such post, one of those pillars of the lexicon that made the site so famous. We'll dig into it in detail in a minute, but do you want to tell listeners just sort of like what it is that you put out there on Reddit?
Yeah, absolutely. The most famous by far of my maybe 12 Reddit posts ever is a post that I made as a sort of summary of a discussion I was having with some friends. I am a longtime player and occasional DM for Dungeons and Dragons, but I've also played a lot of other tabletop role-playing games. And in my experience, a big part of a good game is creating a good character that is able to be engaged with for the broader narrative, that has enough, a lot of people call them hooks, to be there for the DM to hook you with, to pull you into the story. But my friends and I call them knives. And this is because I wrote up what I call my knife theory, which is essentially a reaction to the fact that my friends like to, I say, lovingly stab me with twists and turns and raisings of the stakes in game. I will drop little things in my backstory that mean something to me and my character, and then suddenly I'm handing a weapon to my DM essentially, and suddenly I can act all shocked when I'm stabbed with it later, like, this part of your backstory, here it is. And so I wrote up basically a theory about what makes a good character, how you can craft a good backstory, including a certain amount of these knives into the story to make sure that there is enough fertile ground there for a DM to find something that's going to get you engaged in their narrative, to stab you in a bunch of different and creative ways.
This is such a great way and catchy way to describe it. Just as an aside, in my wife's family and in their culture, you should never present someone as like a gift, like a pocket knife, a steak knife, a chef's knife. And so like I have gotten from like my, her side of the family, a nice chef's knife as a gift, like packaged and wrapped. But in the gift, you have to put some money in there so you can hand them like a quarter or a dollar bill back. So it's not actually a gift. It's an exchange. I've paid for this because if you give someone a gift of a knife, eventually that knife will come back to stab you. So goes the like peasant logic. And so I think knife is it's perfect in this case.
Is this part of her Latvian heritage or her Florida heritage?
Latvian heritage. Florida people might also believe this as well. There's a lot of strange peasant folk beliefs in Florida as well.
I think it's very
in this
Florida
case, it's perfect. You are giving someone a knife with the expectation it comes back.
100%. Listen, Latvia knew it was up when it comes to character creation in Dungeons and Dragons, because that's exactly the point of knife theory.
Yes, they did. They're one of the top dungeon and dragonist cultures on the planet. They've got like a set of like deities and like magic spells and
Hell yeah,
stuff.
man.
Yeah.
I love knife theory. You know, I think this is a very like illustrative example. It obviously was resonated with people because it's very easy to, I think, visualize and make sense of. You got a bag full of knives or a block full of knives. At time of this recording, this post has 14,000 upvotes, which as a longtime Reddit user, I've been a regular user for like 11 years, and that's still like I think half as many as I've ever gotten like total, which is embarrassing. But congratulations to you. But I think the great
Thank you.
thing about knife theory is it like you guys are familiar with spoon theory, right? It's a way of thinking about
Yes.
how much like mental capacity you have for a day. I'm not yet familiar with any sort of fork theory, but I think that there is a lot to be said for kitchen utensil based visualizations of organizing your relationships or your lives or whatever. And yeah, this is a very uh, it's a very short post, Christina. I really appreciate how concise this is. It's got bullet points. It's very well explained, and it still is like the first thing that comes up when you Google knife theory. So let's dig into what a little bit more detail. Though you described it in really all there is to it, but maybe we can talk about some specific types or forms of knives and get into some examples of how they might be
Absolutely.
used.
For sure. I mean, I this is my grad school engineer education coming out, and the fact that it's like I need to make a bulleted list with qualifiers and values assigned to these knives. Though the values are so much so as like regular knife or big knife in the as far as how you scale them. A lot of it was me because I know that it's very common in backstory creation when you're creating a character. It's very common and easy to have this idea of like, oh, I'm gonna have like these people, my family, my character is gonna have these things in the background of their life, and the DM's just gonna kidnap my mom or like kill my sister or whatever, just kill my parents. And that can be repetitive and kind of boring, in my opinion. So I wanted to come up with some other ideas for things that I thought would be good knives, good things that would still effectively stab you, as well as raise the stakes, draw interest. So I believe I mentioned some things like obligations that you had potentially still hanging or had abandoned. I mention not just like family but childhood friends, mentors, but also like if there's family heirlooms that you are attached to, if there are secrets that you are keeping, if there are uh like people who you work for or have some kind of bond with outside of family. It could be like you could have a boss that has asked you to do something. It's very similar to like a warlock pact in that way, but it doesn't have to be exclusive to warlocks. I just tried to come up with a bunch of different things that uh, would broaden your character building horizon, things that could be considered knives.
Yeah, one thing that I absolutely love about arranging this is it's like, hey, do you want to write a paragraph about your character? Do you want to write a couple bullet points? Do you want to write 5 pages? It's all good with me, the dungeon master, as long as you can pull out a couple little sections that I can actually use at the table. And so if you present this to your players at like character creation, you can say, do whatever you want, but give me 3 knives, that kind of thing. I mean, so I'm curious, like, how you're an experienced DM. How would you employ this in like a session zero? How would you present this to your players, other than just being like, go read Christina's Reddit post, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but that would be helpful
There's
too.
actually it's very interesting because when I originally posted this, I was not expecting it to be popular. I posted it like something like 11 p.m. at night and then went to bed the next morning and find out I'd found the first page of Reddit, which is terrifying. But one great thing that's come from that is that other people have kind of done the legwork on the best ways to present this to new players. Somebody went through and did like a revamped version for the GM binder, which I'm sure your listeners are familiar with as like a resource for game
Mhm.
masters. And another person had actually made a worksheet where they have separated like all of the different types of knives into different groupings, and then like made little places where it's like, okay, so in this one, pick a thing from here that relates to your character. And so like you can give it to people at a session 0 if they have no idea, you know, what sort of character, what the backstory they want to have. You can present them this worksheet. But what I usually do,
So, like, if you wanted to
mhm,
do extra work, you could like prepare them a Mad Libs
essentially,
document.
yeah.
Like, name a place, name a problem. Okay, fill it in for me if you're like not into writing your backstory.
Absolutely. Or what I tend to do, like I've talked to people before, and I try to just start with like, what does your character care about? Like, give me something your character cares about, be it a person or an ideal or an inanimate object, and how can we spin it off from there? And it doesn't have to be, just like you said, it doesn't have to be 5 pages long. It doesn't even have to be a page long. It can be as simple as like, oh yeah, my character is part of this guild and his mentor is the guild master and he promised that he would do this thing and he's got this special ring that his grandfather gave him. Done. And it's like, cool, that's 4 different knives that you've come up with right there.
I really like I really like the list of examples that you gave, and I really like the range of them. You mentioned like there's the obvious ones, like you said, like an enemy is a knife, you know, a trauma or a phobia, like that's a knife. And if you're thinking purely, thinking very like literally about the knives, then you know you're thinking about things that can stab you. But like, there's you have a lot of great examples of less obvious or more nuanced a subtle knife, if you will. Things like, you know, even if you don't know who your parents are, or if there's some uh, missing memories or powers that you don't know about. You know, it doesn't have to be something that is like going to produce like immediate, obvious, painful conflict. But any of these things, again, if we're thinking about knives as tools for the GM to use to produce an effect, to agitate, to complicate, to add complexity to the game, to a scene, then there's a lot of different knives that you can play with. And I had a lot of fun just sort of thinking through the knives that my various characters have had and some of the ones that my players have presented to me deliberately or unintentionally. It is a very like a delightful framing device. I've gotten a lot of use out of it.
I'm so glad. I do think that it is something that a lot of people kind of do intuitively. It was more me putting language to something a lot of people are already doing and trying to frame it in a way that it was easier to quantify and talk about for people who don't necessarily have that experience or don't do it intuitively. Because, like you said, a lot of people, if you look at your character's backstory, already have these elements in it. There's already knives in your butcher block, so to say. And then over the course of a campaign, you will also create more. Like the DM's going to find more. And you can also get stabbed by somebody else's knife in your party. Like that happens too. There's unintended consequences of actions across the board. But there's a great example, just like you said, in a podcast, my I Seduce the Dragon podcast that I do with some of my friends, which you're familiar with. Ryan, her character, starts the
A group
game.
that is mostly knives, in my opinion, based
It's
on
just so many
my listening
knives.
experience. Yeah,
They are chainsaw men of characters that are just made out of pointy things.
And one thing people don't notice, and this is oftentimes like DMs think of it like, oh, my player gave me nothing. My character gave me like no backstory. And what I love with knife theory is you can kind of reframe that where it's like, well, no, they gave you unintentionally a whole lot. Like taking the character, my friend Ryan's character, Erastus, for example, it was a character who was like, I don't remember anything at before a certain point. All I remember is being here and I have this bar and that's it. And it's like, okay, great. You've just given me so many knives. The fact that your entire past is a secret to you, that's I can do so much with that. And it's like, oh, you're the bar that you have, that's a knife. That's something that I can raise against you. And there's all of these things that you don't necessarily think of as knives. So from like a DM perspective, it's also very useful, I think, to have examples of like categories so that you can kind of look through even the most sparse character backstory and say, oh, maybe I could do something with this, actually, this little tidbit that I've been given. Maybe I can forge this into something.
This is such a great like bit of game design, and I know you're saying, hey, this is something we were doing intuitively. I know other people are doing intuitively, but I don't believe a lot of like hard truths about role-playing game design, but one thing I do believe 100% is that all of the best game design innovations are things that people have been doing at their table, either intuitively or just developing with their friends. But then someone comes along and codifies it and explains it in a way that other people can use it too. And yeah, so I think this is such a great example of that.
Aw, thank you so much. It's something that I definitely have felt very useful in my tables as well.
One thing you mentioned before that, you know, this was your grad school engineer brain needing to quantify or put numbers or bounds around things, and I gotta say I greatly appreciate when somebody else does that for me because I'm not very good at that, but I do actually like really appreciate the again, just like +1 knife, like that makes a lot of sense to me. It's very helpful in thinking through this. And you have a couple of interesting things in this post. I really liked this part where you say, on the other hand, you don't want to be a sad edgelord with too many knives. Buttload of knives just means that everyone in your party will inadvertently get stabbed by your knives, and eventually that gets annoying. Anything over 15 knives seems excessive. You point to 7 as the sort of like ideal number of knives. Is there a method by which you came to those numbers? By the way, the answer can be it's a gut feeling. I do that all the time. I'm just wondering if you know brought some mathematics to it. But I mean, those sound correct.
It was a lot of personal experience that drove the numbers. I was literally just kind of going off of my like the data accumulated from field research of how many knives is too many knives. I have been guilty of making a character with too many knives and then it becoming a problem for the rest of my party because all of the things that were happening, all the things that were coming up in the story were like related to my character. It was basically just like I had too many active holding things, like not these knives, these swords looming over my head. I had too many of them and we couldn't go anywhere without tripping over a problem I'd caused. And that became incredibly irritating even for me because it was getting in the way of the story. Like we were all trying to tell a collaborative story and it became too uneven with my risk, my contribution, me stabbing everyone else with my knives unintentionally. But you know, on the flip side of that, if you don't provide any knives, if you have this character that's just kind of like not engaged, has no personal stakes in the story. And this is something that I have a philosophy in D&D about where the DM, obviously a large amount of the onus of storytelling is on them to move action forward, but I do think that there is a equal amount of weight that players have to carry in the sense of meeting the DM where they are at. Like you cannot just sort of expect to be pulled along by the tide of the narrative by your dungeon master. You have to do some swimming. And so with knife theory, it was also a way to give players some agency to say like this is what I want to be stabbed with. These are the things that mean something to me and are going to get me engaged in the story. And if you don't have any of those, or at least, you know, like a decent amount to choose from, not every knife is going to be picked up. And that's kind of the inspiration for suggesting 7 originally. I will even say that you probably can get away with fewer than that. But having 7 I thought was a good selection because your DM doesn't necessarily need to choose all of them. Like not every single knife that you present is going to be useful or is going to apply in in this situation. Like you're not going to use a butcher knife to, you know, slice delicately through some ham in a setting. Like it's they're situational knives and you have to have a variety for the DM to pick from. Or for other players to pick from because you never know who's going to stab you with these things. But if you have too few, then they may never get used at all because maybe it just never comes up. But if you have too many, then it's just a big problem. So I was going back through like backstories I had written for characters and trying to pick out things, elements in that backstory saying like, oh yeah, this is a knife, this is a knife, this is a knife. This is how many I have found success with in my campaigns. That seems like a reasonable range to suggest to people.
Actually, this brings up something interesting for me. This is a great point, and I trust your judgment on this. But it reminds me that as important as having enough knives is, I definitely think that for the DM, something that you want to think about and something that you want to encourage in your players is having a proportional number of knives. I have run a lot of
Mhm.
games where I had players who gave me so many knives, and other players in the game gave me nothing. And I work really hard at this, but like sometimes someone will make it so easy for me to just like throw things in here and there, and then I will realize that I haven't like brought in anything from somebody else's backstory. And I'm scrambling to try to like make it fit. And this is, again, this is a great way to think about the knives. These are tools that you have. These are levers that you can pull, but making sure that that your players have a similar number of equally useful, equally valid knives that you can draw from is an important thing to do, which kind of circles around to something that we touched on at the beginning, but I would like to talk about a bit more that ties into, Christina, what you said about players being more involved in storytelling. But like, how can DMs use this to encourage players to engage more at like session 0 or in the backstory stage or in the beginning? How do you actually like implement this in a way that makes sure that you end up with a good block of knives, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a big part of it. I think that working with your players to develop that, and it can start in a sense from, like I said, like you don't necessarily at session 0, I think, have to have all of your knives ready because as I said, during the course of the campaign, you'll get more, you know, d hopefully, one assumes. But in a good session 0, when you're talking to your player and you're asking them like, "What what's your character about? What's their vibe?" Like I said, the point of knife theory is to also engage with the player on what they are comfortable with engage like what level of risk they're comfortable experiencing, what level of heightened danger is going to drag them into the narrative, is going to engage them. And so asking like, what are your knives? Let's make some knives here. You're basically you're saying like, what are you comfortable with me using against you? And I think that's a perfect two-way conversation to have for the DM and the player, because then, everybody's on the same page. Like you said, having an equal number of knives. If you have all of your players together for a session 0, it's often like helpful because they can kind of collaboratively come to those knives together. Um Starting the conversation just being like, "Hey, here's an example of knives. Here's some things you can use." I've discussed with other people using like pre-existing fictional characters as examples of how the theory works. Like you can
Mm.
take almost any character, take their background and say like, "Oh, here are the knives in this character's background." And you can also then point in stories often where they are stabbed with those things. Like it's the same concept of like the Chekhov's gun or like foreshadowing in some way. It's like, yeah, this thing is introduced about this character's backstory, and here is where it comes in and stabs them. And you can use that as a great entry point for players to say, okay, so here's a character, here's an example. What's something that you would feel comfortable with me coming back around and using in a creative way? Like, let's say you have a family, and you want your family to live. Like, you don't like the idea of like your characters' backstories, your parents, your children, your cousins, whatever, dying. Okay, I understand that, but you maybe are comfortable for me using them in a different way. They could still be a knife, but if you say like, no, 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 we're not having this. This is not a knife for me. I don't want you to stab me with it. Then you could say, okay, well, let's now think of some other thing maybe related to this. Let's make up some more stuff, some nuance with this character. It can also be like trying to encourage them to dig a little bit deeper, whereas like, did this person give you a gift? Did this person make you like, did you make a promise to this person? Do you have a rivalry with a close friend and there's a common goal that you were working with? I don't know if you guys are familiar with like, there's these lists of like character questions to fill out where it's like, questions you should know
Mhm.
about your character that you should be able to answer about your character. And it's often very hyper specific questions about world building or about like very significant moments in your character backstory. I can find that a little bit limiting in a sense. It lacks a little bit of the creativity to have a variety and have change. And so I thought that implementing some more broad categories that are a little bit more flexible to individual character story was more, what's the word I'm looking for? It was more intuitive. It was easier for players to get into on a session. Like I said, starting with examples from pre-existing media, I think, is a great way to begin the process to show off the concept. Like for instance, a great one to use is like, okay, um, John Wick. He's got a knife and it's his wife who's already dead, but he loves her and she gave him this dog and the dog is a knife. And so anything that happens to that, suddenly he's
No.
engaged. They took the dog and now he's been stabbed. And so like that's an easy example of like, oh, this is something that's important to you and it's going to get you involved.
So an example of deciding, like with like a fiction, using a pre-established fictional character again, of deciding, hey, how do we want to use this knife, is if this player comes to you and says, I've made this superhero character, its name is Spider-Man, and Spider-Man is an orphan raised by his aunt. And, you know, the DM can say, okay, I'm going to use that aunt to put her in danger, and that'll be a knife. And you're like, well, no, I don't want to be like rescuing, you know, Marissa Tomei all the time.
Mhm.
And then you as the DM could say, okay, we can still find a knife in this backstory. We can say, hey, you're an orphan, you don't know anything about your parents, I'm going to use that. Perhaps your dad was like a bio whatever researcher and was into some weird superhero super science stuff. Okay, cool. Right. You know, there's the, you can take any, it sounds like you can take any point and decide which part of it you want to make the knife for that campaign.
Absolutely. You're just sort of deciding what edge to sharpen, essentially. Like there's one thing I love about knife theory is there's so many metaphors you can make with it. And so many people other than me have made
Mhm.
so many good ones and given them to me over the years. So I'm like, excellent. I have so many metaphors now. Um, because yes, it's very much that is it's the concept is also like, let's do something creative and unique and engaging for you, the player, that is going to be bespoke for you. It's not just like, okay, you give them to your family, they all die. No, what if instead there was some lingering promise you made, or there is some unknown element? You gave me this character. What if that character has a past that you don't know about? What if they have done things that have repercussions for you in the future and they're safe, but the things they've done are now haunting you and you didn't even know? Like, there's so many different angles you can come at it from if you just sort of expand the possibility of what can be engaging, what can be an effective weapon against the player. And it can be confrontational language sometimes that I use. I think this is me as a
It's a violent metaphor.
it is a violent metaphor. It's me as like a lover of like drama and horror coming out, where I love my characters to be in peril. And so when I'm suddenly like threatened by some element, some unforeseen consequence of my backstory, that's when I'm most delighted in D&D.
Can we talk systems for a moment, the
Absolutely.
three of us? I think our assumption so far has been like, we're working with Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, some kind of system like that, where the assumption is that coming up with the character's backstory is just a creative endeavor that you do on your own. On one end, we have a ton of systems, from Daggerheart to Slug Blaster as part of character creation. You're essentially coming up with backstory elements that are like already crafted as knives. Do we have opinions on those systems? Does this theory just like, hey, this works great, just use what you already have? Or is there something that this approach can add to those systems like Blades in the Dark, where it's kind of already generating knives for your entire character all the time?
I think, I mean, when if it's built into the system, I don't see, it's sort of doing a lot of the work for you, which I think is great.
I mean, we've talked about this before. When we covered Fate, when we talked about Blades in the Dark, they have what is essentially like a knife system sort of built in. But the interesting thing, and this gets back to what you said earlier, Matt, about how the best game innovations are things that people are already doing. I think we recommended that you just kind of like staple this on to D&D if you want to like have a more robust backstory. And I think that's kind of like what's cool about it. The games where it's built in, I do sort of like it. You know, you have these games where you have to develop like bonds or parts of your backstory that explicitly give the GM something to work with, but you can very easily just do that sort of informally, like Christina has described in Knife Theory. And I what I kind of like about Knife Theory as it exists is it's so versatile, and the systems that exist in Powered by the Apocalypse and Fate and Blades in the Dark and whatever are pretty good, but they're usually structured in such a way that um I do find them like a little bit restrictive. So I might even like want to lean on just the informal version of this. I had this thought, bear with me. One thing that's really cool about this, and we can circle back to Matt what you were talking about, but like Christina, I realized
Mhm.
that this mirrors um, a very good piece of writing advice, which is to focus on conflicts, not like plots or setting or even character. And that's I think
Mhm.
like what's really good about Knife Theory is that you're starting with like what can be used to create or generate or amplify conflict, and from that you can build out your backstory. But getting to what you said, like it's not that interesting to me either to have like a big list of like here's this deep like world building stuff or like where you're from or whatever. I'm more interested in how is your character going to interact with the world? How are they going to generate conflict, or what's going to generate conflict with them? And I think that's what makes this such a useful piece of GM advice.
And speaking to the concept of, there are all these systems, there is something to be said for different levels of depth for character development in different systems. The one that comes to my mind
Mhm.
most immediately is I recently ran a game of 10 Candles for some of my friends, if you guys are familiar with that game.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes.
and the purpose of that game is like it's a one-off. At the end, your character dies. There's not a whole lot of time in that to explore like the full depth and range and nuance of a character. Oftentimes, you're literally on a time limit. You have candles that are burning, and with the time they go out, that's it. And there is a sort of knife system that is built into that game already, with the idea that like other people are actually assigning you knives. Other people get to assign you these flaws. And I mention in the original Knife Theory post, I mentioned like phobias. I also mentioned like crimes that you've committed. All of these things are knives. And if I were to go back and edit the system, I would put like character flaws also could be knives. It could be things that you view as failings of your character, which could be vices, or it could be like personality traits that you dislike about yourself that you're trying to overcome, maybe. As you said, sources of conflict, things that are going to drive your character to try and overcome. And in 10 Candles, maybe you don't have the time to explore 7 knives, but maybe you got like 3 of them, and the system kind of asks you to provide them, which is built into the storytelling. And then also there's systems like another game that I play often with my friends is Monster of the Week. I'm a big fan of Monster of the Week.
Love
It's
that game.
very fun, but also like the way that the system is built, the characters are supposed to be a little bit disposable because you might be dying all the time. You're not really supposed to get too attached to them. There is sort of a system for there to be like a knife equivalent thing, but as you were saying, Rob, that like having this informal additional add-on that you can kind of slap in. Because I think that the knife theory, I created it with D&D in mind, but it is just sort of a character creation theory. It's the idea of like, you need to make a character that has some level of conflict involvement, some level of care, of things that they are going to be struggling with or going to be invested in, built in already. And that can sort of apply to any narrative. And maybe the amount of depth changes depending on the system, but I think just generally speaking, if you're creating a character for a story, you want them to care about things. You want them to have breaking points and aspirations and regrets and all of these complicated narrative elements that can be used to fully engage them.
On the, I think, since you're mentioning systems with that are less involved, on the other end of the system backstory creation thing, away from things like Daggerheart or Blades in the Dark or Slug Blaster, is a game like Mothership or The Black Hack or Morkborg, where rolling up a character takes 5 minutes, and you might have like little trinkets about your personality or quirks, but the game is not really about writing a backstory. Is there any like wisdom that knife theory can offer us for these types of kind of play to find out what your character is systems?
I think that in that instance, it's more just about recognizing a knife when you see it. It's not necessarily about presenting them, but it's about
Yes.
finding them already in the environment. If you, again, talking about like trinkets of your backstory, it's about looking at these things and thinking like, how can I use this to stab someone? What prison shiv
You
can I create
you
here?
find 3 goblin teeth, 6 gold pieces, and a
Yeah,
knife, which
exactly.
yeah, is now part of your character.
In many narratives, you're discovering, like I said, you're discovering things about your character as time goes on. Sometimes events happen, you realize what your character cares about in the middle of a game. Or like things that didn't have meaning at the beginning of a story suddenly do, and you can find interesting ways that they apply to your situation. And so, yeah, a lot of knives are going to be developed over the course of gameplay, and it's very much just about like spotting them when they appear.
Yeah, I was just gonna agree with that. The cool thing, once you've built the knives, once you've made the knives a character creation, a lot of the fun and the continuing challenge is recognizing them as they appear in play. And I was Matt, I was thinking the same thing about like, yeah, the Black Hack or Mothership. Like, how do you generate knives for that? But like, yeah, the knives appear as you're playing. Like my current Mothership group, the players who have survived more than 1 or 2 sessions already have a list of phobias and traumas and attachments that they I may or may not get a chance to like actually like use, but like just in the course of playing that game, I have a whole list of knives for each of them that just appeared through just the way that the game runs itself. And I think that's I think the versatility of using this to think about your characters and how they approach the world and how you uh, generate interesting conflicts for them is just looking at what happens as tools and thinking about conflicts or thinking about what you can do with those little bits of information. Matt, I kind of liked your idea of these lists of characters. Do you want to have us take a look at some theoretical knives?
Yeah, does that sound like a fun activity to just take some example character backstories inspired by characters either I've created or run games before, and judge them according to knife theory, see if we can help knife them up, get them a knife
I love
as
it.
we go through their backstory.
Yeah, I'd love that. That sounds super
I would
fun.
say like, oh, excellent. Cool. I like when I was thinking about this, I was like, oh, all elements of the backstory are either a knife, something that's immediately useful in play to a DM, a spoon, it's absolutely nothing. It's just for the player playing that character to just eat ice cream at home. Or it's a fork. It's just something for them to poke around with at the world and be like, hey, I have this connection to the world. Like when a player's like, my ranger is a dwarf. Okay, that doesn't really give me a knife, but hey, you have a connection to the fantasy world we're creating where there are dwarves. Cool, right? It's not bad. It's also not something I use. Okay, here's my I thought we would start with like an easy one. And it would also let us know how good is Daggerheart at creating knives. I took the example backstory from a character in Daggerheart, Marigold Seok, Elf Ranger. Here's their backstory. Born in the city of Bloomfair, had to leave her mother behind to go on the run. She is being chased down by the leaders of the Four Elements for stealing their stone of power during the last ceremony. How many knives we got?
3 immediately.
Knives out. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, three or
so, like,
four. Three easy ones,
You
maybe a
could-
fourth.
3 easy ones. You could maybe split, because the having to leave your mother behind thing I can see as 2 potential knives. I would potentially split that up. The existence of a mother you care about is 1 knife. Having to leave her behind could be an entirely other knife, in the sense that maybe this is a reoccurring regret
Ooh.
that can be used against you. Not the fact that your mother exists and is in danger, but somebody could come at the character.
Emotional knife.
Exactly. Someone could come at the character and take that trauma of having to leave them behind and use it against them, replay that in some way. So that could potentially be 2.
I would say that we could, if we were trying to be really, if I were trying to really like dig deep in this paragraph for knives, I agree with Christina. The mom is 1, maybe 2. There's the being chased by the leaders of the 4 elementals. If I wanted to get creative, it mentions a stone of power and the last ceremony. Stone of Power doesn't say what happened to the Stone of Power. That could be something she still has on her, or it left an impact on her, or it is somehow still tied to her. That's a knife. And this ceremony, who knows what happened to the ceremony? Maybe the ceremony was incredibly traumatic. Maybe the ceremony is something that she has like a personal tie to, or she was involved with some way. That's, I think, something you could dig into if you were like, I want to try to like really squeeze every last possible knife out of this paragraph. But I think there's 3, maybe 4, like really obvious, easy ones. Just in a couple of sentences.
If we're splitting up both the stone of power and the ceremony, you could for sure split those up into different knives, because then I could argue that as being 5, because I was thinking the mom, the trauma of leaving her behind, you have this organization that is after you 100%, that's a very big knife.
Nice.
And then you have the item that you potentially stole, and that is a big knife, because that's an obligation, that's a liability that you have on you. Is it safe for you to have this thing? Not just because people are coming after you, but maybe the item itself is dangerous. Maybe the stone of power is not a safe thing to hold on to, and it's causing problems for you just by the pure nature of what it is. And then, like you said, the ceremony could be another knife. Maybe it was an incredibly important ceremony that you unintentionally caused to fail, or maybe it was, a coming of age ceremony that means something for somebody else, and now that person has a vendetta against you. There's some fertile ground here for knife sharpening, knife raising, knife grabbing.
Yeah.
Being a DM and using knife theory to approach your players' backstories is like unlocking the T-1000, Terminator vision. You're just immediately seeing the weaknesses that are going to make play at the table fun in what your characters give you. I love it. All right, let's try one that was not created with Daggerheart. That is maybe like a more typical D&D backstory you might get from a new character. Atreus the Wizard studied at the Deep Glen Wizarding Academy, is best friends with an owl, and is an illusionist and a tiefling.
Okay. Depending upon your setting, being a tiefling can come with some in-baked bias because of their fiendish associations. Not every table is going to play it that way. Some people just like tieflings for fun and flavor, but some players are going to potentially view being a tiefling itself as a knife. Having your best friend with an owl, I think you said, that is a knife, definitely.
Yes.
You could potentially have that if you were a creative DM. You could play that in a bunch of different ways, not just the idea that the owl could become in danger or could become a liability. You could question the potential character loneliness that inspired you to not have other friends. It's like, what's up with that you just have this owl? Um, and then yeah, you have
That's so brilliant. I was thinking this one had no knives, but you are absolutely proving me wrong.
there's knives where you
This is definitely
listen, it's just about where you
one
look.
where I would be like, give me some more knives. But again, if we're trying to do like a challenge run here, there's the owl, there's the tiefling thing. I think you could listen. You could make studying at an academy be a knife. Like either
You could.
you're somebody who overvalues your education or has a chip on your shoulder, or everybody hates you because you're a hopped up fancy pants who went to school. But I would say for our listeners, if somebody gives you something like this, tell them to come up with something a little bit more spicy, something a little bit more teeth. But yeah, there's a little here to work with.
I would from
Yeah,
this.
there are knives everywhere with eyes to see them.
From this, I would definitely agree for digging deeper. Like one thing that I would jump off is like, okay, do you have a favorite teacher at school? Is there a teacher at the academy you studied at that you thought had like a big influence on you when in your studies as an illusionist? Or what was your goal? Like what made you want to go and become an illusionist? Like did you have a family pressure to make you do this, or was there like some experience you had as a child that made you want to be an illusionist? Like try and figure out what the personal stakes are in this. For sure, there's a bunch of different angles you could come at this with. I also was thinking like maybe you go to a hoity-toity wizard school and everybody kind of thinks you're a stuck-up asshole because of it. But also like what if there's some scandal involved with your school and it turns out that like I don't know they taught you dark magic and you didn't even know, and there's unintended consequences in the things that you've been doing this whole time. Like there's angles you could come at, but I agree, more detail required, more knives needed.
Excellent. All right, are we ready for another one?
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's do it.
Again, based on real characters, the names and details change to preserve the identities of the innocent. Okay, a cyberpunk or a Shadowrun or a cyborg game character, the code name Stack Overflow, a self-taught hacker, was once a mega insurance company employee, a currency trader on the side, but wants to become the best hacker in the world and wants to become rich and famous, in debt to the Yakuza, a scar on the side of their face, and loves techno jazz.
Okay. I counted maybe think 8 in there potentially.
Nice.
It's way better than
And
me. Let's hear 'em.
I will say that not necessarily every knife has to be something painful or something that is like a threat. Because one thing that is just the very last example when you're saying loves techno jazz, there's again so much fertile ground for that where you could potentially turn that into a knife by having like there is your favorite techno jazz musician is having a concert and you have to be there, and that is suddenly a
Nice.
knife because it's like, oh, this is something I need to do. I'm suddenly like, oh, I'm stabbed in the heart, Cupid arrow style. I need to do this. But yeah, no, having an employer that I think there was like a mega insurance employer or something like that that you said.
Right.
Yeah, that's
An
definitely a
ex,
knife.
yeah, there used to be an ex corpo,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That history.
You never want to be an ex corpo.
Not at all.
Yeah, they're gonna come for you.
They're going to come for you. There's also some social stigma. What if people find out and have like opinions about that? Those could be two different separate knives. The social stigma around something as well as the former obligation and maybe the wrongdoing you did. You mentioned the Yakuza. That's one big knife. That's a big katana coming at you.
It's a huge knife.
Huge
a
knife.
monomolecular edge
Yes.
vibro cyberpunk katana. Yeah.
Absolutely. Having these aspirations, having these goals, the desire to be famous could be a knife because there's going to be negative consequences. That exactly what will you do? How far will you go to accomplish that dream? That can be a knife as well.
So it sounds like when you're taking, you as the GM, when you're taking character backstories and you're looking for these opportunities, it sounds like what you are doing and what maybe most GMs should do is kind of write out the bullet point of what's there and then kind of ask yourself some questions or give yourself some prompts for possible deployment, so that you're, when you're preparing the next couple of adventures, you're like, is there going to be an opportunity for a techno jazz star to be here? Is that, or is this the, like, hey, their former employer, is this the time to employ social stigma, or is this the time to be like, hey, they want you back in their cubicle? So, like, just giving yourself like some options for your notes about that character.
Absolutely. And one thing that is very interesting and I think effective in games where you're playing with multiple people who are all giving you different knives, it can be sometimes overwhelming. Like, how do I use all of these effectively? A great thing to do is try to find ways to combine them, to like strap two knives together into making a bigger one. So it's like, okay, so maybe I have this one character is member of the Yakuza, but it turns out that like they're also this other player's cousin recently joined because he has a debt also, and like now both of you are being conscripted into working this thing, and now you have common backstories and common goals that players can work towards together.
Christina, it's been super. I'm really glad that we did this little exercise, Matt, because having you demonstrate how you use this has been really interesting and instructive to me. I've already learned a bunch. The questions you asked
Hell
or
yes.
the example questions that you had were really good, and I loved what you said about techno jazz, because I was kind of thinking about that, but I hadn't gotten there yet. But a knife can be something that you're just passionate about. It can be a good thing. It can be something that
Absolutely.
you care about in sort of like a big picture way. Like you're really excited about techno jazz, or you really love ramen. Like, you cannot turn down like an invitation for like to a good ramen place, or you're a nerdy little wizard guy and you got to go into every single library. But like thinking about knives in this way is just like things that you care about, that can be used against you, that can be used to sort of like put you in a bit of a bind, is
Hmm.
is so great. But I think this has been really helpful, because it isn't just like you said, it isn't just traumas. It isn't just violent pasts, or dead parents, or missing family members. It's really anything that can be used against you. And that sounds very adversarial, but like I know exactly what what you mean by that. And I think it's a good thing
I'm glad.
to put
Yeah.
in the hands of
Motivate
your
you.
Yeah.
Anything that can
yeah
be used to motivate against you.
Absolutely.
yeah
It's
yeah yeah
sort of in a lighthearted way you could say, like, to have a knife to your back to do something. A more lighthearted example I love to use from a character that I made. I made a cleric character in Dungeons and Dragons who joined his religion because he had a really fat crush on the high priestess when he was 15 years old. And then later in the campaign there was a competition happening where that high priestess was giving the reward to the winner. Like, you got to go and she would be the one granting you. And suddenly I was like, I have to enter this competition because this woman is there and I need to be in this competition. I need to win. And suddenly the entire party was like, we are here to support you. We are all entering. We're going to do our best to make sure that you win this competition. And it was like the stakes were raised. I was like, I am being forced to do this thing because this one girl that I had a crush on when I was 15 is going to be the one who gives me this ribbon. And so it's that kind of like lighthearted. It doesn't need to be something that is as adversarial as threatening, but like just like you said, Matt, it's something that's going to be motivating.
There are knives everywhere for DMs with eyes to see. Beautiful.
Anything can be made into a prison shank.
Yeah, if it's not like a great obvious knife, it's more like a shiv, because you're crafting it, yeah, as you go. Christina, thank you so much for coming on the show. If you haven't already, you can find I Seduce the Dragon on YouTube or wherever fine podcasts can be found. What else should our listeners know about it if they don't already?
It's a great, fun, actual play podcast. It's me and a bunch of my friends. We're all from very diverse backgrounds and life experiences, and we're all coming together to be kind of stupid and horny in the world of Icewind Dale. So if you want a adventure that vacillates wildly between being very serious and very dumb, but with always excellent
I
sound
do.
design and music and heart,
Yes.
then I would recommend it. It's a good hang. Please come join us.
I would also recommend it. Please subscribe. Link in the show notes to find I Seduce the Dragon.
It's a great show, everyone. I also recommend it. Thanks for Christina. Thanks for listening, everybody. And whatever you do, keep rolling them dice.